courage. Let's give Mr. Hellkamp a warm PSA welcome. Wow, that was a great introduction. It's almost like I wrote it myself. Yeah. Good. Well, it's really great to be here with all these people, these courageous people who are willing to admit they have fear. Right? Because that's sometimes what we have to do. I look at the table, there's about 10 name tags out there that are too afraid to come. So it's good that you made it today. Steve's talk, or his question about overcoming and what we talked about at our table reminded me of the story. I started my business in 1994. I was working for a major training company, and I decided, you know what, I'm tired of working within the boundaries that they had. I wanted to go out on my own. And I knew I had a good product. I knew I had a good process. I was excited to go out and talk to people about the offering that I had, but I was kind of afraid to make phone calls. Like, really afraid to make phone calls, because I was more of a speaker than anything else. And a friend of mine gave me a lead. He said, you got to call this guy. He's a sales manager with a company in St. Paul. You really have to call him. He's a great guy. So I had that lead on my desk, and it was a Monday, so you can't call on Monday, because Monday's not a good day to call. And then kind of, he laughs, because anyway, so then I moved it, and it was Wednesday, and well, you know how busy Wednesdays can be, so I didn't call on the Wednesday. And then it was Friday, and wow, Friday's an awful day to call, especially in the afternoons. Everybody's gone, so I didn't call on Friday. So then it got buried over the weekend. And then I forgot about it for a week, and then I saw it, and it was kind of starting to smell bad, right? You ever had a lead start to smell bad because it was getting a little stale? And then, but it kept, like this thing I kept sticking it under things on my desk, but it kept rising to the top, and I kept avoiding it with a variety of different reasons, even though I knew I had a good offer. So finally, I was talking to the friend of mine who gave me the lead. He said, have you called him yet? He said, well, call him. He's a great guy. He'll take your call. He'll probably see you. Just call him. So as soon as I got done with that phone call, I picked up the phone and I called him. And well, now I had a whole other set of fears that I had to deal with. But I did call him, right? How many of you have been in that situation where you've had a fear that's kept you from doing what you know is going to further your career, further what you're doing? We've been in that situation, right? We've been in those situations where we've had those fears. And you know what? Those fears aren't new things for us, are they? They've been around for a while. How many of you remember high school and the fears we had in high school? Remember those guys, especially when we had to ask a girl to a dance? And even though we were looking good, right, and we knew we had our stuff going because we had, the right bicycle, it was still hard to ask them out, right, or to ask them to dance. Remember that? And then our buddies would be urging, go ahead and ask her to dance. And then some other guy would walk up to her and ask her. We're like, oh, I missed my chance. Right? It was like Friday, I can't call her on Friday, right? So, but if we finally screwed up our courage, we could dance with that hot babe, right? Or we could do that thing that we wanted to do. But the interesting thing is that we still deal with the same fears, right? We still deal with the same challenges that we had. If you look on your tables, I've put together a little follow-along worksheet that you can use. So if you just open that up, it says wonderful things about me, very similar to what Steve said on the first page there. But if you open it up all the way, you can use this to kind of follow along with us. And so why haven't we overcome these fears? Just from the audience, what are some reasons that we've had these fears all of our lives, and yet we haven't overcome them? What's been the barrier?
Fear of failure.
Okay, we're afraid of failure. What else?
Fear of success.
Let's not go through our fears. I'm going to do that in just a second. Why haven't we overcome the fears?
The comfort zone is comfortable.
We like being in the comfort zone, right? We get used to doing certain things in a certain way, and we continue to do them that way, which means we avoid those things that we fear, right? What else?
We might not realize we have them.
We may not realize them until they come to a point in our lives where we need that strength, and then we find out we don't have that, right? What else? Well, how else have we kept from growing in these fears? Other ideas? So we just ignore them, we push them to the side, we try to take ourselves out of situations where where we don't want to be in, right? I coach people and I teach people public speaking skills. And that's an area where people are, those fears really come to the fore for us. And I'll work with people that are executives at companies that have avoided speaking since college. They had a college class they were supposed to take and they didn't do it because it was public speaking, and they've still been avoiding it. So we can find ways to avoid those things until we can't find ways to avoid them anymore. So let's go on to our next question, and that is at your tables, and there's a spot here on the sheet for you, but I want each table to come up with what are 5 emotional fears. So we talked about, I think we said fear is one, a fear of success, fear of failure. What are the top 5 emotional fears? Not things like, phobias like black cats or stepping under ladders or breaking a mirror, but what are the things that are kind of emotional fears? Let's come up with a list at each table of 5 of those. It'll take about 3-4 minutes to do that. All right, good. Thank you very much, Jeannie. I appreciate it. Thank you all for participating with that. So, did we get all the tables? Okay. So it looks like embarrassment and rejection, fear of failure, kind of the big ones. Being wrong might be able to fit in some ways else, losing control. So they can kind of fit in different areas. But these things aren't nothing, right? And I think that's the challenge that we look at sometimes when we deal with failure, or the fear of failure, or the fear of things, is that where people tell us, well, that's nothing. Just overcome it. Just do it, right? And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. Here's the list according to Listverse. Whether they're right or wrong, I don't know. Loss of freedom is a big fear of people. Fear of the unknown, right? And that can kind of come into that fear of embarrassment, what's going to happen, right? Fear of pain, that's not one that we usually have to deal with. Sometimes we have customers that are pains, but we don't have to deal with pain. Disappointment, I think that came up. Or being disappointing. Misery, loneliness, that one really didn't come up. But ridicule, that embarrassment, right? Being ridiculed, being rejected. Death is always high on that. And then failure. So if we look at the top 4, failure, death, rejection, and ridicule, embarrassment, rejection, and failure were kind of the same top ones we came up with, right? The joke, I think, speaking of death, I always use this in my presentation classes. I think it was Seinfeld that said, when you're at a funeral, if you'd rather be in the coffin than making the eulogy, then, that's kind of how we fear giving presentations. So, what are we afraid of? Well, we got some big areas. First of all, we have some natural fears, right? Fears are built into us when we're born. We're afraid of falling. We're afraid of heights. We're afraid of darkness, right? Self-preservation is a big part of our lives. And back to the early caveman, right? They were afraid of the dark. Why were they afraid of the dark? Because there were bad things out there in the dark that would eat them, right? And so we learned these fears. We learned to be afraid. If you see a little child and a big dog comes and barks at them, they don't go, oh, puppy, right? They run away in fear because we have these things that are built into us that cause us, and they're very, very deep down. I heard a good speaker about a month ago, and she was talking about how when we get into this fear state, it moves where we're thinking to the amygdala, I think is it, and now we're not thinking anymore. We're going on pure reactions when we get into the fear state, and that's the self-preservation, right? And then we also have our temperament. We're built different individually. And for those of you who have children, you can see it much clearer in children, because as adults, we get good at hiding it, right? We get good at avoiding those situations where, Bob, I need you to speak at our next presentation. Okay, I'll do it. I think I've come down with something, right? We get good at avoiding those situations. But when kids, we can see it. I remember I have 3 boys, and my 2 oldest ones, we would go to McDonald's when they were little, when they wanted the Happy Meal prize or the toy, right? And my oldest one, they'd get their Happy Meal, they'd sit down, they'd pull out their toy, and my oldest one wouldn't like it. So he'd hand it to his younger brother and say, go get me a different one. And the younger brother would go right up to the counter and say, I need a different one, we already have this toy. But the older one would never do it. We'd say, John, the older one, do you want another hamburger? Yes, well go order it, here's $1. I don't really want it that bad. Then you give the $1 to Dan, and Dan would go order my hamburger, right? It's just temperament, right? It's just temperament, and he learned how to work with his temperament, and he's growing out of some of those things, but we're built in certain ways. We have certain things that we have to overcome. And then we have the nurture side of our fears, because we have fears that have been built into us as well, and these are kind of the more sad ones, because our families can build fears into us. Have you ever told your children, be careful, be careful, be careful, be careful, be careful, don't do that, be careful. And then you go out and you're going to start your own business, or you're going to do something, and your mother says, are you sure? I don't want you to get hurt. I don't want something to happen to you. Don't talk to strangers. Ever. Don't ever talk to strangers. Well, how will I ever make friends? Don't ever talk to strangers. And I think it's worse now. I mean, we had things that we would tell our kids, but we actually purposely didn't say, you know, don't talk to strangers. We had other things that we told them to do, but it wasn't don't talk to strangers, because we didn't want to create that fear. Because I'm in sales, I don't want them to learn how to not talk to strangers, right? But you know, it's interesting when Kathy, I don't know if you met my wife Kathy, who's videotaping, but we would go for walks now with our dog, and people walk like this, and they don't have phones, but they won't make eye contact and they won't see you, right? Because they aren't gonna talk to strangers. So we have these things that we're building into people. Our school and friends are not always the most positive situation where we learn how to take risks, right? Because in school, how many of you had a permanent record you were always told about? Right? Everybody's like, it's going to go on your permanent record. I never saw my permanent record, but that thing was full, okay? Because there was stuff all over my permanent record, right? And to tell you the truth, what does our school teach us to do?
Sit down and be quiet.
You know, Mitch brought up a quote that I heard. I heard a speaker say once, for 6 years we tell our children to walk, 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 and talk, 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 and for the next 12 years you tell them to sit down and shut up. That's right. It's true. How about when you get a paper back from the teacher? What does it say, +5 or -95? Or 95 or -5, or, right? It says -5, in red, circled, right? With the implication that if you get those 5 right, you will be perfect. Because the only thing we're allowed to be is perfect. Yeah, how many of you are in your own business and realize the need for failure? Right? So we're taught to be afraid to fail because it will go on your permanent record. And by the way, sit down, shut up, regurgitate what I tell you so you can be perfect. A students work for B students, or B students work for C students, and A students teach. Okay? Because C students didn't know, they forgot that failure was bad. And then work. Work isn't always the most the positive place to learn to risk. Right? If you're in sales and you've got a sales manager and that sales manager needs to get certain things accomplished, they're not always going to be the most positive supporter of failure. Right? Get out there and make that sale. Out there and make that money. They're not always saying, try, risk, fail. You didn't make it, let's learn from it. Why didn't you get that sale? Right? So our work isn't always the most positive place for us to learn. But I think there's also, if we go back to nurture or nature, there's a fearful mindset. And I think this is important, and there's a place for you to write down these 6 areas on your sheet. People with a fearful mindset are always cautious. They really took into themselves that message to be careful. Be careful. What are the ramifications of this? They're always looking, and I think, again, this is something I think education does to it. I talk to people who've been to business schools, and they're so worried about all the things that could go wrong, they never think about what could go right. They're always, they want all the lights to be green before they go downtown. And it's just not going to happen, right? Oh, I'm turned red, we gotta wait, right? If any of you have done any work with like companies like KPMG or Accenture, right? Those guys, those consultants are really good at finding wrong things with everything. They don't get anywhere, but they can make great pie charts. They're worried. They're worried about everything. What's going to happen? What could fail? They worry and they live in that worry and they churn that worry over. And so they're churners. They churn over their fears and they churn over their worries, and their mind is always very, very active about not only what could go wrong, but what's gone wrong in the past that I am sure will go wrong again. Right? And so they relive and relive and relive in that churning fear of failure, because what could go wrong? They're worried about maintaining, about not losing something. A great story, I don't know if you remember the Flying Walendas. But the Flying Walendas was a family of high wire walkers. Still some of them around. And Carl Walenda was the patriarch. And he died falling off the wire. And his wife was interviewed, and she said, I knew Carl was going to die because he quit talking about getting across and started talking about not falling. So all we worry about is maintaining. We can never grow. We can never move forward because we're so worried about what we could lose. And then they're very judgmental. They're very judgmental of themselves, but they're even more judgmental of other people. That will never work. You can't do that. We don't do that this way here. Right? That's not the way we do it. We don't try that. And so we have that judgmentalism built in that keeps us from moving forward. And then their focus is always on themselves. So every decision they make, it's how can it affect me? How is this going to hurt me or help me? And of course, because they're churning that worry, they can never see how it can help them. And so they're often locked in or paralyzed by their own panic. Now let's look at the courageous mindset and juxtapose these. They're optimistic. Courageous mindset is optimistic. They think things will go well. And generally, they feel that things are going to go well. That if I try this, things will pretty much work out. And I'm okay with that pretty much working out. They're not looking for everything to be perfect. All the lights don't have to be green. They're trusting of themselves and other people. So they trust. So when they meet someone, their assumption is that person's going to be pretty nice. Right? I trust the world to be kind. I trust the world to be nice. I trust the people that I work with and deal with to be professional. I just trust them. I don't go up to them and assume it's going to go badly, right? They're forgetful in a very positive way. And that means they tend to just leave those failures behind and move forward. They learn from them, right? They'll analyze their failure, but they don't overanalyze it. And they don't generally blame themselves for that failure. They'll blame circumstances, whatever, but they're not going to sit and point so many fingers at themselves that they can't move to the next step. They'll look at that failure, oh, I could have done this better, and now I'll learn the lesson, but I'll forget the failure. So they're forgetful in that way. They're always growing. Steve talked about this book by Jim Rohn. I've got 3 books here that I'm going to quote from today, right? I think people that have a courageous mindset are spending more time reading great books than they are listening to talk radio. Okay, or watching the news. Right? Now, my father is a world-class Eeyore. Right? And a world-class Eeyore will spend all of his time watching the news and fretting over what's going to happen. Okay? I don't think that really courageous mindsets are sitting there taking all the bad things happening in the world into themselves, right? I would bet for most of you, you saw what happened in the election, and win or lose, whatever your direction was, you said, the sun will come up tomorrow and we will move forward. Right? We have a great country and a great economic engine, and it's really kind of hard to screw it up, so let's keep moving forward. Yeah, I'd rather it went in a different direction, or yeah, I'm okay with the direction it's going in, but let's move forward because this doesn't have as much effect on this as I do. Right? I have a lot of effect. And when we hear these news stories about these people crying and moaning, I'm thinking, what do you think it's going to do to you? Right? What are you going to do about your future here? Right? So they're always growing. And then they're encouraging. They're encouraging to themselves and they're encouraging to others. Courageous mindsets are not afraid to support other people. To support what people are trying to do, what people are out there trying to happen in the marketplace. They're not afraid of other people. I know Steve here is a competitor of mine in many ways. We do the same thing. Or Scott, I'm sorry, Scott is a, but I don't even know his name. No, I'm sorry, Scott. But we're not afraid to talk to each other, right? To courage, and we were laughing about stealing ideas from each other before we started because it's okay. All right? It's okay to, because we just, you know, if we bump into each other, we bump into each other, but we aren't like butting heads on every deal that we go through in the world. So I don't need to be afraid of him. He doesn't need to be afraid of me. We would rather encourage each other and build a relationship than fight about, you know, who our enemies are. So that's the courageous mindset. Oh, one thing, other focused, right? So they're focused on others. So when they're making a decision, or they're making, let's say they're making that decision to make the phone call like I had to make, you know, 20 years ago, the courageous mind is not thinking about what could go wrong, but they're thinking about what they could give to others. Right? If I make this phone call to this person in St. Paul and things go well, that'd be great. And he'll get some things out of it, and we'll learn. And it's just, they're just looking at those things from an other person focus, not from, oh, what's going to happen to me if they say no. Right? So, to control fear, we must control our mind. The 6 inches between your ears is the most important real estate you have to worry about day in and day out in everything that you do. And you have to control the input that's happening in your mind, and you've got to make sure that you're making good decisions about yourself. This is a good decision, not because of me, but because of 12 months of good decisions that can come from being here, because I've never come here to PSA and heard a bad speaker until today. So, it's generally 11 out of 12, and you just never know when that's going to happen.
You're referring to me then.
Yeah. One of my favorite books that I was surprised that Steve hadn't read, because Steve is such a great reader, is James Allen, As a Man Thinketh. How many of you have read As a Man Thinketh? Okay. Wow. Very small, and probably the most powerful book I've ever read in my life, out of something that's 60 pages. All right, and you get it free on the internet, so you don't even need to buy it. All of his stuff is out there.
Can you say the title slower?
Yeah.
No. As a Man Thinketh.
Okay.
As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. I'll read you a quote. A man's mind, and you can say a man or woman's mind, I'm not going to change his archaic talk. A man's mind may be likened to a garden, which may be intelligently cultivated or allowed to run wild. But whether cultivated or neglected, it must and will bring forth. If no useful seeds are put into it, then an abundance of useless weeds will fall therein, and will continue to produce their kind. Just as a gardener cultivates his plot, keeping it free from weeds and growing the flowers and fruits which he requires, so may a man tend the garden of his mind, weeding out all the wrong, useless, and impure thoughts, and cultivating toward perfection the flowers and fruits of right, useful, and pure thoughts. His whole contention in this book is you will produce, and cannot help but produce, exactly what is happening in your mind. What you think about all the time, what decisions you make to listen to watch, to read, will happen in your mind. When our youngest son was starting 1st grade, we talked to the teacher and we said, we don't let him watch a lot of TV. She said, I can tell. Because all the others, Power Ranger times, she said, because all the other kids will spend all their time kicking each other like in the Power Rangers. And your son doesn't do that. Okay? Didn't make a special, just means my wife really hates TV. But we are a product of what we watch. If we watch a lot of The Simpsons and we watch a lot of comedies on TV, we're going to talk and treat other people like they treat other people on those shows. Because we are filling our mind with those things, and we can't help it, because when we come to times of stress, whatever we planted in that mind will come out. Right? How many of you dropped the F-bomb in front of your mom? Okay? Am I alone in this? Okay? It wasn't the first time I said it. It was the first time I forgot to hide it. Because what I said and what I felt in my eventually came out in a situation in front of my mother where I wasn't ready to hide it. Right? The thought seed that I had planted there came out at the right time. So be cautious of that. So how do we control our mind? How do we control our fear? Well, we need to make sure that we are in the cycle of development and not in the cycle of failure. The cycle of failure is very easy because it's to do nothing thoughtful. Come home, sit down, turn on the TV, read the newspaper, do what everyone else is doing. you will be in the cycle of failure. It's not hard. It's the lack of effort is the cycle of failure. The cycle of development means I need to have my attitude at a point where I say I'm looking for something. All right, so the first step is attitude at the top. I'm looking for something. I need knowledge. I need information. I need to get better. I need to become a better speaker. I need to become a better salesperson, right? And then I need to actively go out and say, I'm going to look for that information. I'm going to look for information on how to be better at sales. I'm going to start coming to PSA every month, and I'm going to start learning what I need to know to become a better salesperson. I'm going to pick up that book by Jim Rohn, or I'm going to pick up How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling, or I'm going to pick up Maxwell's book on Failing Forward. I'm going to pick up a book, or I'm going to watch some things on YouTube if I like watching YouTube of people that know, and I'm going to learn and I'm going to get some information, right? And then I'm going to do and I don't know if you caught this, but the most important word Steve said when he talked about the Jim Rohn book is he said, I applied the information. Okay? Because if I don't practice it and start using it, it's just, as a friend of mine said, you're a good attitude bum. They got a great attitude, it relates me, and they don't do anything different, right? So I've got to start doing something with it. I've got to practice it. And what's going to happen when you apply something for the first couple of times? It's going to go great? Probably going to go badly. Or it might not be as smooth as you hope, or the words don't come out, or it's like the first time I asked a girl on a date, I said, hey, how you doing? What? You know, because it just didn't come out right. This one thing right here, whoops, I don't want my own buttons. Anyway, this one thing right here, this practice, is probably the #1 thing salespeople won't do. We hate to practice our talk. We hate to practice our calls. Right, Steve? We want to, give me the script and I'll do it. Then we failed and we said, see, that doesn't work. I'll go back to doing what I always did because I was comfortable there. This is practice is key. And once we practice and we do it and we have a success, and we do it over and over again, we develop skills. We get a new skill. We get a new capability. And then what happens to our attitude when we have a new capability? It goes up. It's better. It's risen. And then we start searching out more knowledge. And that's why it's a cycle. Because once we start learning and we get into a growth mode, we're so fired up by that growth mode that we go look for more. It's exciting. And we start going and looking for those things. Fear defeats more people than any other one thing in the world. Ralph Waldo Emerson's right on the front of your talk. Okay, I want to go to an activity. So we're talking about salespeople. We're talking about fear. So at your tables, I want you to come up with 5 activities that salespeople fear. So we deal with these. We deal with these fears. We can see there's a lot of common ones. Thank you very much, Jeannie. Cold calling, asking for the order, giving presentations. Then we got all kind of the sundry follow-ups and things like that, and you know, there's all kinds of things. But it's not the same for each of us, and each of us has to find a way to overcome. If there's anything here, now there's 2 ways we can deal with this, right? We can avoid, and we may make the decision to say, one of these things is so far outside my comfort zone, I'm going to find some way to have someone else do that, and I'm going to focus on what I'm good at. Right? Now, Maxwell does another book called Talent is Never Enough. But he also talks about how important it is to play to your talents. Right? So I should do more of things I'm really good at, and maybe less of things that I'm not good at. But all of us have things maybe that we're not good at or that we're fearful of that we still need to do. And this is kind of the space that we're talking about, right? So we're going to have, I think, 6 different practical suggestions for overcoming these fears and 7 mental issues, ways to overcome these fears. All right, number 1, practice in a safe environment. Practice, practice, practice. Don't make the first time you try something with that client. And so, as was mentioned, we're talking to the C-suite. You have to talk at a different level. Our presentation changes. Are you really going to do it for the first time in front of that CEO? Really? As hard as As long as it took to get that appointment at that level, you're going to practice on it. All right? So practice in a safe environment. The picture I have here is I used to do work with Capital Safety. And Capital Safety does work at height. And in their Red Wing facility, we all, to kind of learn what their people went through, I went through their training on how to work at height and how to wear the harness and everything. And I'm not real comfortable at heights, but when you got all this gear on, man, you can just fall and nothing happens. But they have this whole room where you can practice, so you're not doing it on the job site for the first time. Right? So you practice in a safe environment. So for you as a salesperson, you need to find a way to practice, to do that thing which you hate to do because it's embarrassing, it's kind of stupid, and it's kind of dumb, but it's really a lot better if you practice it before you practice it on your client. All right? So practice in a safe environment where you can make a mistake, where you can screw up, where the words can be wrong. Be consistent in your execution. If I'm going to make phone calls, I can't make one phone call every 3 weeks and expect to get good at it. I use the image of a plane taking off. Let's imagine that the pilot gets everything gunned down, his plane's going down at 300 miles an hour, he's just about ready to lift off, and he goes, I'm done for the day. What's going to happen? All right? But we expect sometimes as salespeople that we can engage it in gear for a day, and then we don't do that same thing for 3 weeks. Then we engage it in gear, and then we don't do that same thing for 2 weeks, right? If you're going to learn to speak in front of people, you better find situations where you're speaking in front of people, because if you only do it once every 6 months, you're never going to overcome your fear. If phone calling is your challenge, you're never going to overcome that fear by doing 2 phone calls a day, if you get to it, because it's last on your list, because you hate it, all right? You're going to have to do 10 or 20 or 30 or 40. You've got to get yourself to a point. There's a point in your phone calling that I found that I get to a rhythm. I get going. I get moving. And it isn't the second phone call. It's the second or third. Matter of fact, one of the things I'll do is I'll call up a friend usually. If I'm going to start making phone calls, I'll make a couple of phone calls to clients just to get myself going on the phone and having things go in a positive way, and then I'll start doing cold calling. Okay? So get yourself moving and do it enough to gain competency at it. But you've got to be consistent at it. Bruce Lee said, I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times. Get good at what you're going to do so you can be a professional. This is called the Professional Sales Association. Now, we call it that because you make money doing it. But not every salesperson I've met is a professional. A lot of them are hacks. They embarrass us in our profession. All right? So you be the professional in your profession. And that means you practice it, you learn, you figure out what the right thing is to do, and you do it. Start small to gain confidence. This young man is in trouble right now, I can tell you that, right? He's not starting small. And this goes back to the conversation about the CEO. I don't start my phone calls with my most difficult phone call. I don't start my appointments at the CEO level. I learn my trade, I get better at it, and then I can call at higher levels when I know things. And when I know enough to be a resource to that CEO. Start small, start in small ways, get better at it. Associate with courageous people. I can't underestimate for you, or overestimate for you, the power of association. We are so focused, for those of you who are parents, right, we focus on our kids. Don't associate with those people. That's what, who are you running with? Who are you hanging with, right? And then we hang out with bums. And by bums, it can be the TV shows we watch. It can be the input that we put into our head. What we read and what we watch and what we listen to is association. It's who we're associating with every day. This is a great association. I have never come here to this room with these people or to the group that Scott works with, the SME, and found it to be a negative, downer situation to be in. If I can make it to these meetings, I make it to these meetings because they build me up, they make me more positive, and I'm around people who give me ideas and give me courage. For those of us in the room that are sole proprietors or sole consultants, we need this. We don't have the people at work. But I can tell you only half the people at work are this. If you work in an organization, you should be avoiding about half the people that you talk to every day. Because they're negative downers and they're not helping you mentally. The water cooler is not the great place to talk. The coffee room, the lunchroom, you do better half the time to grab a book and read it and avoid the people that you're having a conversation with. And then you need to have a mentor or coach. Now, who knows who this is, who this golfer is?
Jason Day.
Jason Day, right? And do you know who his coach is, who the guy next to him is?
Yeah.
Who is it? Is that his caddy? It's his caddy, but it's also his coach and his mentor. His name is Colin, I'm going to grab the quote here, Colin Swatton. Colin Swatton is his coach and mentor, and he became his coach and mentor at age 12 when his father, when Jason's father died of cancer. And here's Jason's, now, to let you know about Jason Day, he's ranked number 6 in the world. He won 3 tournaments this past year, including the Players' Championship, and has earned over $8 million this year alone. So he kind of knows what he's doing in this field. He says his caddy is his encourager, his disciplinarian, his friend, his teacher, and his father figure. He's been there for me since I was 12 and a half years old, Day said in a press conference. I mean, he's taken me from a kid who was getting in fights at home and getting drunk at 12 and not heading in the right direction to a major champion. And there's not many coaches that can say that in many sports. So he means the world to me. I love him to death. And so here's what I would say to you. Do you in sales, in whatever your profession is, do you have a coach? Do you have a mentor? Do you have someone who is willing to work with you weekly, to talk to you, to have conversations with, and that person is in your corner all the time? Well, that just took your sales manager out, in most cases. Because your sales manager is in your sales manager's corner. And there's many of you who have a sales manager and you won't tell him everything or her everything. You'll lie to them. I remember a friend of Mitch and I used to work together in the same company. I remember a guy that worked with us used to make up his whole calendar. He wasn't going to anything or doing nothing, man. He just filled out his calendar, man. He had all these appointments. He was such a liar. It was so great. I think he spent all his time being creative. Listen, I have an appointment with it. And then my boss said, let's call some of these. Man, the look on his face was fun. Anyway, you remember that guy? So we lie to our bosses, right? We lie to our friends, and we need somebody who will tell us the truth, can see what we can't see, because that's what, a professional golfer can't see a swing. He can't. We look at ourselves through a fake vision, right? Through a screen, and sometimes we see only what we want to see. I'm a really positive person, so I don't always see the things that somebody could say, hey, Bill, you really should be doing more of this. You're really screwing up because you're not doing some of these things, right? We talked about that fear of accountability. I think that came from this table over here. I would say get over that fear of accountability and find somebody that you can coach, that can coach or mentor. You've got a few of us in this room. Scott coaches, Scott coach, and Sarah coaches, and I coach. And I would recommend that you look into it. You may not be able to do it. You may not be able to afford our services. Your company may be willing to help you with it, but I would recommend that you talk to somebody about coaching. I coach an executive in sales, and I know Scott, you coach in sales, selling, and so I would really recommend it because it's a very important part of your life, and it's probably something that's missing. All right, let's talk about the mental game, because these are the things that all happen between your ears. See, all those other things were activities, things that you can do differently. Right? There's no barrier of fear on those. These are where the fear barrier comes in and where your head's at, and you've got to change it. So I'm going to have to go through these fairly quick. Remember the vision. I put my sleeping child there because that was the vision I had to remember when I was trying to make decisions about where I was going, right? And the things that I had to do. What their life and their future and my wife's life and my family's future was more important than a no. You've got to remember what you're doing it for when you hit those stumbling blocks. Everything you want is on the other side of fear. Everything you want is on the other side of fear. Understand the numbers, right? Sales is a number game. Stephen, my favorite book. Scott, I think yours too, right? How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling. This is many years ago, but he said he was failing. So finally I determined to keep records. 1 year later, I stood up before the agency, and here are the records. I made 1,849 calls. These were face-to-face calls. These were the way he did most of his business was walking into businesses. So, out of those calls, I had interviewed 828 people, closed 65 calls, and my commission was $4,251.82. How much was each call worth? I figured it out. Each call I made netted me $2.30. Think of it. 1 year I had been so discouraged I resigned. Now every call I made, regardless of whether I saw the man or not, put $2.30 down in my pocket. Later on, he learned some things, and he moved that up from $2.80 to $4.27 because he made a decision to not see people after the third call. But he knew his numbers. Once he knew his numbers, he could be more successful. What are your numbers? How many phone calls? How many appointments? How many closes? Quit worrying about what closes. Started at the front end of the funnel. You've got to fill the funnel, or there's nothing closing. You can't say, well, I'm only going to make 65 sales out of 1,829 calls, and you can't go, I'm only going to make the 65 calls that count, because you just don't know which ones they are. So you've got to make the calls. So understand the numbers of your business. Dwell on the successes. We talked about the people who are successful. They think about what is successful. Play the videotape in your mind over and over again, not of your failures, but of the things you've done well. The people that you've met, the appointments that you've had. Look at what the outcomes of the greatness are and focus on, I want to make that happen again. Bob and I had a great conversation on Wednesday, and he showed me the story of a great success that he had had. And they got it in book form. It's so cool. What a great way to remember a great successful engagement with a client. And they can live with that and say, we can do this again and again and again. Our goal is to duplicate this kind of great success. Let's think about that. And I'm sure his companies had things that didn't work out as well. Who cares? That's the past. Here's what I want to think about. This is the vision that I want. Dwell on the success. The fears you don't face become our limitations. Even if we avoid them, they're still our limitations. Rationalize the fear. Rationalize the fear. Dale Carnegie in his book, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, says, think about the worst thing that can happen, recognize that you can deal with the worst thing that happens, and go ahead and move on. All right? So if the worst thing that happens is, no, I'm not really interested, big deal. It's not, no, I'm not interested, and I hate your face, and you're ugly, and you stink. Right? I've never had that happen. In all my years of doing this, I've never had anybody say anything but, no, thank you. Not really. Don't call me again. That's probably the worst, right? No, don't call back. Oh, some guy I don't know asked me never to call him. Deal. All right, rationalize the fear. Fear, false evidence appearing real. I love that. I love that acronym. False evidence appearing real. That's fear. Because what we do, once we do it, and we start to overcome it, what happens to it? It just disappears. It just disappears, and 2 years later we'll go, why was I even worried about that? And that's why a coach or mentor can really help you, because they can take you to the place mentally where you forget what it was. People who have been there before know what you're going through, but also know what the goodness is on the other side of going through that fear. Guard the input. This is again, who do you associate with? There's people out there that will say, you can't do it. You're no good. Don't bother me. You've never done that before. Run away. Go away from them. They're bad people. Right? And they may be your mother. They may be your father-in-law. When I started my own business, my father-in-law, wonderful man, Jack McGowan, he had opened up China for Caterpillar Tractor as a sales manager. Okay, he was in China in 1972. So he was a great salesman. But he worked there for 40 years, his entire life. So I come along, marry his daughter, have 4 jobs in 10 years, He thinks I'm a flake, now I'm gonna go start my own business, okay? I love Jack, but I couldn't deal with him for about 2 or 3 years. I just had to not go see him. Because I couldn't try to build my business and have this thing in my ear of a man I respected telling me that it wasn't gonna work, okay? So sometimes it might be somebody you love that you just have to say, I can't, maybe you gotta sit down and lay down the law to them. If you wanna see me anymore, I can't take this input anymore, right? And maybe it's your boss and say, you know what, you're not building me up. This is not what I need. So guard the input. Virgil said, it does not bother the wolf how many sheep there may be. It does not bother the wolf. If you're a wolf, what do you care about the nose? What do you care about the naysayers? Move on. And then finally, you've got to believe in the value. Believe in the value of what your offering is. If you don't believe that what you're selling and what you're marketing out there is going to change people's lives, do something else. What are you doing it for? I had a friend of mine, I used to be in advertising, and I worked on the B. Dalton account. And on the B. Dalton account, we sold books, right? We had big newspaper ads with like 50 books on them. And then we worried about how the shadow dropped and whether the copy was right. And it was very tedious. And a friend of mine, I picked him up from the airport, he was visiting, and he said, well, tell me about what you're doing. And I told him, and he goes, well, what good is that? And he was right. I started thinking about it. I thought, what good is this? This is no good at all. This is stupid, what I'm doing here, right? I'm not adding value. I'm putting books on a page and making sure the copy's right. So we all got fired. It was kind of a thing, you know, it's a heaven sent thing because B. Dalton got bought out by Barnes & Noble and we all got fired. And I got 6 months severance for working there like a year. So woohoo, this is great. And then I went out and learned, went to a business that I thought I could do something in training. Right? I went and found something I wanted to do rather than just taking whatever the next job is. So believe in the value. All right, I think we're going to have you do this activity on your own, and that is, think about the fears that you have. Write your key 1 or 2 fears down. What are you losing because of that fear? What are you giving up because of that fear? What strategies would help you overcome that fear? So out of the mental game or the practical ones, what can you use? And then what can you do to get started right away on that? Read a book, think about something. Started with, and that is, so I made that phone call, and I talked to Jay, and Jay started using my business, and he became my best customer for the next 5 years, doing hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of business. He's now one of my best friends. I've known him for about 30 years now, and we've become very, very good friends, and our family have become good friends, and so anything can come out of that phone call. Right? The most wonderful things in the world can come out of that phone call, but you will never know if you don't make it. And I'll just close with this quote. All you need, this is from the guy who did the We Bought a Zoo, Benjamin Mee. All you need is 20 seconds of insane courage, and I promise you something great will come of it. It's been a pleasure being here with you. Thanks.